you actually will be out about $80,495 in 5 years because you took from your 401k, just given the investment growth, as well as the reduction in potential payment if you lose your match. Cool. Now, if we were to run this then for another 25 years, right? And we said, okay, well, after 5 years, I'll pay my loan back. I'll get my match back. I'll go back to 3%. And you take your current balance of the 5-year ending of 135 compared to the 226, and you grow it at the same amount, same contributions. The difference between the future value of that money, Dan, $495,387. You then compare that to the difference in what you would have had in interest. You would be losing $454,183 in growth. I mean, Dan and I would be like, don't do that. Don't do that. Welcome to Critical Thinking Required, hosted by LBW. This podcast is intended for free thinkers, entrepreneurs, and knowledge seekers. Join us as we discuss relevant financial topics, explore with guests their financial journeys, and engage with experts in industries such as space, media and entertainment, real estate, and many more. Buckle up and enjoy the ride. Welcome to Critical Thinking Required. You're with your host, myself, Tim Bickmore, and my colleague, Dan Weiss. And today, Dan and I are going to talk about 401k borrowing. It's a subject we've been wanting to talk about. We haven't hit on it yet. And so now it's time to talk about it, talk about the intricacies. If you should, if you shouldn't, why shouldn't you? Give some framework behind it. So we're excited to talk about that. Before I let Dan kind of start the conversation, as always, if you like our content, share, like, subscribe to our stuff. It would really help. We really appreciate it. Dan, why don't you kick us off and let's start on talk about 401k and maybe borrowing from ourselves, maybe to buy a house. I don't know. What do you think?
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, like Tim said, it's a topic we hear about a lot. I feel like a lot lately. And we've seen a lot of data that actually indicates that millennials borrow from their 401ks at a much more significant rate than generations before them. And that probably makes sense based on how often we actually hear this being talked about. It is a source of a lending source that we wanted to go through. There is appeal to it. You do not have to go get a lender. It does not based on your credit. And it's a pretty quick, easy way to get cash. So hence why indeed we hear people ask questions about it. It's also very misunderstood. So we want to spend a little bit of time talking about the components of which someone should look into and better understand before they go ahead and make the decision to borrow from their 401k. And at some point in this podcast, Tim will then break down an example so that you can see how the numbers flow. And hopefully this all helps you understand this topic more so and whether or not it's a good fit for you now or in the future. So that's really the appeal of borrowing from 401k. We've kind of touched on that right off the bat. Let's get into some of these pros and cons. I'll hit the first piece just so you know kind of how to start looking into this. And then I'll throw it over to Tim for what is the most common piece that we get from people when they say, I'm going to borrow from a 401k because of, and this is a misunderstanding in itself. So before I touch on that, understand that not all of you may have the ability to borrow from your 401k. It's really up to the plan. So the IRS allows for 401ks, all 401ks to have this provision, but your particular employer may not have elected to actually have this be an offering, if you will, as it relates to your 401k. So plan must allow for it. We'll talk about what some of those limits and so on look like. Also, the amount that you borrow from your 401k, it's got to be fully vested, meaning that you have earned the ownership of that money. Right. So there's a vested portion. Some people have 401ks that vest immediately. Some people have 401ks that vest over a time frame of anywhere from 1, 2, 3, 4 up to usually about 5 years. That portion that has vested that you technically can claim, that's what you can use. So I'm going to turn over to Tim. Tim, what is the number one thing that people usually say when it comes to 401ks as the benefit driving them to use that piece that we have not talked about so far?
You're borrowing from yourself.
That's exactly what it is. Can you
Yeah.
talk about what it actually means?
Yeah. So it is true. You are borrowing from yourself. So, like Dan mentioned, if you have a vested balance, you can borrow up to 50% of your vested balance or $50,000, whichever is less. That is via the IRS. Now, as Dan mentioned, the plan has to allow that, but that's the amount that you can borrow up to. The nice thing about borrowing the money is it's also not considered taxable. So let's say that it's in a traditional IRA component of your 401k. You take the 50 grand out, the government will tax you because, in a sense, what you're really doing is you're creating a loan, and loans are not taxed. So you can receive that money, use it, and then you have to pay it back. Just like anything else, you're going to have to pay it back to somebody. So instead of paying it back to a bank, you're going to be paying it back to the bank of yourself, which is great. But you also are going to be charged an interest rate. That interest rate will be determined by your 401k or plan administrator. Today's rates, we've been seeing anywhere from 4 to 5%. And so you have to pay that back. So you have to pay your principal amount back plus the 5% over whatever determined time frame it is, be it 5 years or potentially more, if specifically it's for a primary residence. Now, the thing that I want to note, though, is it all sounds cool and great that we're paying ourselves back and not those stinking banks. But you have to remember, you're still paying interest. You're still cashing that back out. It is still an expense. You just happen to be able to receive that expense. Also to note, that interest amount that you're paying, it's not deductible as an interest expense, nor is it going to be tax deductible for taxes as a traditional 401k may be. So you got to remember those things too. So that's where people really get excited about it. It's like, well, why would I give the bank, more? Why would I take more from the bank if I can just go for my 401k and pay myself back and not the bank? There's some potential issues there. And I think those are kind of some of the next things that we're going to hit on that you really kind of have to think about.
And to highlight what Tim laid out there so nicely is that you've got to think about this also in terms of cash flow. So that interest payment is going to increase your cash flow needed to pay back this loan, which we're going to touch on. And that means that you lose that opportunity to put that cash flow elsewhere, which we're also going to touch a bit more on too. So the word match came up quite a bit. When you pay back these loans, and maybe it makes us talk about a bit because this is going to go hand in hand, but it means that you will lose your match. And I'll let Tim touch on this too. You'll lose your match while you're paying that back. And that is a component that most of the time we find that people have missed, is that, yes, you've got this interest you're borrowing from yourself. Yes, and maybe a very low fee schedule to be able to do so, but you are giving up your match. And that is free money for as free as it can get, I guess, that you're giving up. Tim, I'm sure you've probably got a couple other tidbits related to that.
Yeah, just so our listeners and viewers understand. So when Dan says a match, what he's really referring to is the employer matching contribution. So most employers in the United States will match some component of your contribution. Typically, I would say for rule of thumb, most employers will match up to 3% of your contribution. So if you contribute 3%, they will then match that 3%, 100% of that 3%. So let's just use easy math. Let's say your salary is $250. You do a 3% contribution yourself. Your employer matches up to 100% of that 3%. That would be both $7,500 being contributed by yourself and $7,500 contributing by your employer, for a total of roughly $15,000 per year, which is great. Like Dan said, that $7,500 of free money from your employer, man, you got to take that all day, every day. But Dan is correct, though. There is one nuance to Dan's comment, is that the majority of the time, the plan administrator, if you're to have a loan, they're going to consider your loan payment as a repayment, and they will not match that until the loan is done. Now, that's not for every plan administrator. I don't want to blanket statement that, because not every plan is equal. Some plans will say, hey, if Dan contributes the loan amount back, so essentially the principal plus interest, and he makes those payments consistently, they can consider that a quote unquote match. Or potentially, if you're going to go above that, they also may consider that a match. But it is plan dependent. But most of the time, what employers will do is they will not match you until that loan is repaid. So let's say that you let's say they don't allow it to match until the loan's repaid. Let's say that it's 5 years out that you're going to be able to repay this loan? Well, if you do the simple math really quick on $7,500 that you would be matching, you're going to lose $37,500 by not being able to receive your match over that 5-year period, given the same numbers. It's a lot of money. And now all of a sudden that loan from the bank isn't looking too shabby. What you also have to take into consideration is, and which we'll get into, is it's not even just a match, but you're also removing potentially 50 grand. Now, again, that's the top limit, but 50 grand from your account that's not exposed to the market, right? Which means it's not going to potentially grow, which means you also may have additional loss of earnings over that time frame, not just the match. So it's just something that you have to really pay attention to, understand that what it really looks like, and that the loan may be at a higher interest rate or it may be more, but it actually might save you money to get it from the bank. And now the bank looks a lot better than yourself. So
great explanation, Tim. And so that's the primary way that most people pay back these kind of loans. You also might be forced to pay back the loan if you were to lose your job. And so I guess that's probably a good thing to talk about. Tim, what can you share about what happens when a person leaves their job and they have an outstanding 401k loan balance?
Yeah. So just like anything else, think about it. If you're like went and got a loan from, the mafia, right? And they're like, hey, I'm not going to pay that back. They're probably going to come with some bats and some things, and they're going to start bashing some things in because they want their money back. Well, it's not as aggressive, but it's similar, right? If you have a loan on the books and you are to be terminated or leave your employer, you have a certain amount of time to repay that loan. So if you don't repay that loan, you have some options. One option is that you take that loan distribution as income, which means that you take a distribution. But if you're not above the age of 59 and a half, then you also will have to potentially pay a 10% penalty on top of considering it income. So that is something you have to really pay attention to when it comes to taking money out of your account. Is if you're not going to be employed with that employer for over 5 years, you have to take that into consideration. Now, you could pay it down over the years, and maybe that loan amount may not be as great as an impact. But like I just said, you may be impacted by the match. You may be impacted by taking money out of the account and losing on growth of earnings. And then you may be impacted that you can't recover that loan if you were to leave or be terminated. Now, theoretically, what you could also do is you could roll that amount or that loan into, the IRS does state, an IRA or another qualified 401k or retirement plan. The problem is that will the, let's say you want to do it to your new employer because you left and you're like, hey, I got a new job, I'm doing better. The issue is that will the employer take on the new loan? And they may not. So it's something you have to also take into consideration when you're trying to get out. Now, I'm surprised that they say an outstanding balance of an IRA, because this is exactly what the IRS states. It says an employee can avoid the immediate income tax consequence by rolling over all or part of the loan's outstanding balance to an IRA or eligible retirement plan. I honestly don't know that an IRA, you can recover either with an IRA. I'd actually have to do maybe a little bit more digging on that specifically. But I'm not sure that an IRA would be able to, or how you consider it to be a loan, to be able to continue to pay yourself back. But they do state that via the IRS. So it's just something, again, that you really have to pay attention to because it could negatively impact you. There's like 3 or 4 different times that it could impact you given the potential circumstance. So just something you got to know, something you got to pay the loan back. So if it's not paid back, you got to do something about it. And the IRS is either going to get you or your employer is going to get you, or you got to do some moves. So.
And one other piece actually on that too, is you have to also consider your age in which you leave, because that if you leave and you're before the age of 59 and a half, then that money that you borrowed is viewed as a distribution, which Tim is speaking about, which then also comes with a 10% IRS penalty if you're underneath it.
That's a good point.
Tim's got some really cool stuff to show you here in a second. So just a couple little tidbits for you to remember before we unleash Tim's and his love of spreadsheets. Like has been mentioned a number of times, the limit is $50,000 or 50%, right, of your vested balance, whichever is the smaller of the two amounts. You also have technically 25 years to repay this loan, but that's not common. The IRS allows for that. Most plans are going to have you make payments over a 5-year period. You have to have it paid off in 5 years, typically quarterly. It can be longer than 5 years if it's for a primary residence. That is very commonplace. So Tim has some math he can show everybody to give you an idea as to what this breakdown looks like. So as my mother would always say, Tim, if you could please show your work.
I won't show the spreadsheet because it's a little messy, but I can explain it if that's okay. Because then so our viewers won't get too confused. But I'm always happy to talk. If anyone wants to talk about it, I'm always happy to jump on a call and we can walk through it. And you should really do this analysis before making this impact. And I'm going to just give you the reasons why. And I'm only going to go after a few different points here. I'm not even going to go after the 10% penalty, taking it as income. I'm just going to kind of give it as assuming that we're going to be at this employer for 30 years. We're going to buy a personal residence, which Dan just mentioned we could extend potentially with primary residence, the loan repayback amount. So instead of 5 years, there's potential to extend it past that if the plan allows it. So I'm just going to give some data really quick. So we're just going to assume this individual makes $250,000 a year. We're going to assume their current vested 401k balance is $100,000. And we're going to assume that they want to take out $50,000. The reason why they want to take out $50,000 is they're going to buy a primary residence. The purchase price is $500,000, 20% down would get us to $100,000, and 10% down would get us to $50,000 that we would need in cash to be able to support it. We're assuming that this individual has $50,000 already, but they're looking to do an additional 50 to get to 20% down. Maybe remove PMI for a conventional mortgage, things like that. So we're also going to assume that the rate for the 401k is 5%, and we're going to assume that the employer matches 100% of the contribution up to 3%. So if we were to do the math, again, $250,000 in salary for eligible compensation, $7,500 was what the employee would put in, and $7,500 is what the employer would match on an annual basis. So $15,000 total in contributions. If we were to theoretically take out a $50,000 loan, and let's say that we amortize it over 5 years, the loan repayment amount per month would be about $947, about $946.43. If you divide 7,500 by 12, that's $625 a month. That's just in itself is kind of nuts, right? You're essentially just with repaying this loan, you're going to actually increase your cash flows going into the 401k by $321.43 per month. So that's another thing you just have to take into consideration is that you will be increasing your cash flow given that this new loan is coming through, given what you are already matching. Now, the other thing too is we're going to assume that you're not allowed to get your match, right? Which is usually generally kind of the majority of what typically happens. So you can't get your match. So if we were to take that all into consideration and say, okay, well, what can we get for the loans and the terms? What I'm going to read off really quick is just, let's say we did a $400,000 mortgage and we did it over 30 years at 4.5%. The amount of interest we'd pay in over 30 years would be $329,626. Over 5 years, we'd pay $86,236. Now we're going to compare that to the $450,000 mortgage because we're not going to go after a 401k. We're just going to take the bank at $50,000. We're going to do $450 in the mortgage, same 4.5% over 30 years. Your interest paid would be $370,830. And in 5 years, you pay interest of $97,015. So really quick, the difference between those interest payments on 30 years, you'd pay an additional $41,203 to do the $450 loan. And over 10 years, you'd pay an additional $10,779 in interest. So right from the get-go, if you just look at it from a mortgage perspective, you're like, Tim, you're crazy. I'm absolutely taking my 401k and I'm not about to pay that money. Right? Like that's just pretty simple. The difference in payment too, including PMI, would be about an additional $440 of payment per month at the 450 level. Now, but there's some nuance here because if we don't get our match, we're going to start losing some money. So if we do basic present value calculations and we said, okay, well, what if we just didn't take anything out and did the or let's say we took the $400,000 mortgage, we take $50,000 out of our 401k. We're going to drop our balance from 100 down to 50. And then what we're going to do is we're going to then contribute about $11,322 into on a monthly basis. And we're going to grow that at 7% over 5 years. Our ending balance would be about $135,241. If we did nothing and didn't take out the money and used the same and did 15 grand, because we'll get our match plus our contribution, plus we grow it at 7% over 5 years, our total balance at that time frame would be $226,516. That is a difference, Dan, in $91,274. So if you were then take that 91,000 that you essentially lost out on, and they were to compare it to the 10 grand of interest that you're going to pay more of, you actually will be out about $80,495 in 5 years because you took from your 401k, just given the investment growth, as well as the reduction in potential payment if you lose your match. Because remember, even if we don't grow that money, you're going to lose your match for 5 years. That's $37,500. That is just in itself would get is crushing what it compares to how much you're going to pay in interest. So again, the bank looks like the bad guy if you just look at the bank. But if you look at the bank and start paying yourself back, you're like, whoa, that is not that cool. Now, if we were to run this then for another 25 years, right? And we said, okay, well, after 5 years, I'll pay my loan back. I'll get my match back. I'll go back to 3%. And you take your current balance of the 5-year ending of 135 compared to the 226, and you grow it at the same amount, same contributions. The difference between the future value of that money, Dan, $495,387. You then compare that to the difference in what you would have had in interest. You would be losing $454,183 in growth. So that 450 mortgage, at the end of the day, if you look at it holistically, I mean, Dan and I would be like, don't do that. Don't do that. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't even make sense over the 5-year time frame. Doesn't make sense. So at that point, we would just say, nope, keep your 401k as is. Continue to just take the loan, take the 10%, even increase your PMI, right? Or have PMI, private mortgage insurance, because over that time frame, you most likely are not going to make it up, not even close. Because you have to think that, and Nathaniel will say this all the time, compounding is the 8th wonder of the world, right? Like I think Einstein said that actually, and then Nathaniel repeated him. But it's the 8th wonder of the world. It really is. Like your 50 grand over 30 years not being invested at 7% makes a huge impact. And then lowering your contributions to the 401k by about 4 grand over 5 years is an additional impact. And you can just see the difference in numbers. So that's where leverage can actually be your friend and not be your foe. And yes, I know we all hate to pay the banks and stuff, but it's like that bank is actually giving you one hell of a deal because you can keep liquidity and your money invested in the market over time. And that's just looking at a few different aspects. That doesn't include you leave your employer. You have to pay the 10% penalty plus income if you can't pay it back. So that's just a simple example of just the difference between investment returns versus a loan. And again, we ran that at 4.5% interest rates, where today, again, March 14th, 2022, 4.5 would be about what you could get for a conventional mortgage, 4 to 4.5. So it just doesn't make sense.
No. Thanks for running through that, Tim. I think it's helpful when everything comes together. There's a few alternatives out there, but before we even touch on that, a couple of things to note that we should probably mention is that there are not prepayment penalties when it comes to paying back your 401k loan. So always keep that in mind, because sometimes that indeed will come up. And also note too that your 401k is a different structure governed by different entity compared to, say, like your IRA. So you can't borrow from an IRA, you can borrow from a 401k, and you can borrow from a current 401k. So if you had a former 401k somewhere, you can't do that anymore, right? Even if it's still sitting there, it's a current 401k that you're looking at. So what are some alternatives to look at? You could look at a home equity line of credit called a HELOC. If you have a home and if you have equity in the home, you could be looking at a personal loan. You could be looking at other collateralized items to lend against, such as perhaps a vehicle that has got a clear title. There are other things to look at. It's good that these provisions on 401ks are actually out there, because indeed some things come up. Maybe you don't have the emergency funds. Maybe you don't have access to some of the things that were just mentioned. And maybe it's a funeral that is just not expected, or a tax bill that just wasn't figured in. And so it's good to have a short-term piece like this, but it's really important to just understand those terms. And with that, I'll kick off our close. And for our Masonic friends out there, I'll quote King Solomon: "The borrower is the servant to the lender." So again, you have to know who that lender is, because their terms will be what they are, and they will treat you according to those terms. There is no such thing as good debt. There's just better than debt. Always keep that in mind.
Final thoughts. Yeah, I think it's just important to make sure you explore all your options. And I think it's really important to look at it from all angles. So like I said, and I'm just going to be honest, like if I were to look at the loans and just look at the loans specifically and be like, whoa, I'm going to pay how much more in interest? 40 grand, 10 grand? Like this doesn't make any sense. But that's just one part of the equation. It's not the whole equation, because you still have to think, okay, well, where am I going to get these funds? And removing funds from the market over the long term can be detrimental, especially when it's at rates that are probably lower than what the historical market returns are going to earn. It just doesn't make sense. In addition, it doesn't position you well where you can get caught up in additional penalties. So when we're walking through our decision-making process here, we have to think about the probabilities of what's going to happen, right? We're always making guesstimates or estimates on the future. We don't really know exactly how things will play out. So we have to think about these in probabilities, which means with the numbers I ran for my example, I'm running over 30 years. I'm not even comfortable with that. Not even close. But we could back it down to 5 years and it still doesn't make sense. And then you could even back it down from the standpoint of being like, well, you can adjust your returns, Tim, but guess what? It would probably still actually better out over time because your variable isn't changing. So you just have to start thinking like, well, what's the probability of me losing my job? What's the probability of me leaving my job? What's the probability of me staying in this house for greater than 5 years? What's the probability of me wanting to have to go get more debt for something else, like a remodel? Like maybe I want to access it for that. Maybe I want to go about it in a different way. Or you start thinking as well, what if I started leveraging other pieces of my net worth, like Dan just mentioned? So there's just a lot of different ways you can start processing through to get to the final decision. But I will say, my final thought is that the 401k is not built to be a loan mechanism. It just isn't. It's there for a need, not a want. So if people really need it and it's their last avenue, not a bad idea. Like I would rather see that than 23% credit card debt that you can't pay off. So there definitely is a realm in which it can make sense, but it doesn't make sense in a lot of different realms. And I know I'm kind of going on a small rant, but one thing that I saw recently for millennials is like, well, I can borrow from myself and I'm going to liquidate my 401k. And what people are really maybe talking about is that, oh, I can go and get into different investments like real estate, like private equity, like other things. Great. Well, you better start thinking that you're going to make a bigger return and it's going to be a high probability that you will, because over the long run, it probably won't make sense. Some of that stuff can be extremely risky or volatile. And if you need that cash, it can be a detriment. So what we always want to talk about is that if you're even looking at it from the standpoint of other investments, the 401k is for a certain group of when you're structuring your overall net worth. But if you don't have the capacity to max out your 401k and have money on top of that, it may not be making sense to do the things that you're thinking about doing with private real estate, private equity, or other things. You have to take a step back and understand where you are actually positioned. And then we could even get further into business loans like Rob's program for 401ks. Be careful with that kind of stuff. That stuff is scary. You have to understand the nuances. So, and I bring this all up because, again, the 401k platform is not built to be lent from. It's just not. It's not incentivized to do that. They have put mechanisms to force people to hold it for the long run because 401ks have replaced pension plans. And so the government has siloed us in to be like, this is long-term money. And they try to incentivize that as much as possible. So you just have to know that it's not as clear cut just to take from it. One more comment, COVID-19 did allow for people to take money out with any penalty and to repay it back without any income tax consequence. That was a different story. The rules were rewritten for about a year, and you could probably approach it in different ways. Still probably didn't make sense for some cases, but it could be a lot different from that. So if the government were to go back and create some of these extracurricular or emergency type abilities to loan from, then it could also make sense in that. But again, they're doing that because it's an emergency. It's a need. It's not a want. It's an absolute need for some people. That's all I got, Dan.
It's a lot of great stuff. So thank you to our audience for tuning in. We really appreciate your interest in growing your financial knowledge. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you for taking the time to start your journey of thinking differently and listening to LBW talk about stuff they love. Until next time.